I'm with my friend Raya, and we're just having a little bit of a chat about Jordan Peterson. How you doing, Raya?
I'm good. It's rainy out. I miss the sun.
I miss the sun too. I miss the sun too. So Jordan Peterson, we wanted to do a chart on someone that's influential in our times, and we wanted to use these chart analysis as a example of how you work with a chart and to encourage those of you who are watching who are into astrology, and we want to go a little deeper into chart analysis to give you an ability to ask questions, to reflect on how to analyze the chart, but also to make a kind of a commentary on the individual. So that's kind of a big intention. How does that sound to you?
Sounds good to me. I'm into it.
Mm-hmm. But you had an intention too
For the intention for this chart, you mean?
for these video series that we're doing.
Yeah, I just think it's more to like create a bit of like a routine around practice and sort of a commitment to learning more, especially focused around astrology and yeah, just spending time together and learning from you. It's probably like my biggest.
But you also wanted to, do some study on the herbalism of the charts and
Yeah.
of the people. And so that's a really big, important part of that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I'm definitely going down the like astroherbalism and medical astrology route, and I'm seeing how important that tie is to helping people understand what's going on with their body, but also giving them something that they can do for themselves at home to improve. Like it's nice to have plants that are really tied to somebody's chart that'll benefit them, or understanding just certain ailments and why they're coming up for that individual specifically. And it's just this like perfectly laid out map in their chart. It's really amazing to see actually. So I'm trying to tie all that together with both the psyche and the physical and what you can do to make that better.
Right, right. As you know, my approach to chart analysis has been more psychological. It's about really helping to reflect, to resolve the psychic conflicts in an individual and to bring about wholeness. But I've played a lot with students who are interested in medical astrology and especially with herbalism, and I've done a few videos on that, but it's not my area of expertise. And so I think that you bringing that part of it is really important, or to dive deep into it. So in that sense, it's going to deepen my understanding of the process as well. So that's exciting.
Yeah. It's kind of nice too when um for myself and for people that get to see me sort of fumble through some of it where I'm like, oh, this is something I just heard, like it's new and to watch that like growth and you're like, oh, I've discovered this part from this person and like you just kind of learn as you go with it. So it's kind of to see where it ties in to what you already know with the psyche side. I think it'll be really cool.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And again, this is, I think the point of this video series is it's a study
Yeah.
of chart analysis. And so then if you're joining us right now and if you're watching this, we're sharing our studies and so with you. And if you have any comments or questions, if you know something that you think that we would need to consider, or if you have a point of view, then we want to encourage that discussion.
Yeah.
And if you're running into it and you know more than we do, then by all means, It'd be great to have you on sometime. You know, this is the great advantage that we have in this age of technology, in that we can have a circle and be in completely different places, and so that's exciting. Do you have some influences in herbal astrology that you study?
Some influences, as I said, like the main people that I study from.
Yep.
Yeah. So my top that I really love, I've learned a lot from, is Sage Popham is my main person for. He does a lot of astrological herbalism and medical astrology. But what's neat is he ties a lot of different systems. So he'll correlate alchemy with Chinese medicine, with Ayurveda, and he kind of maps them out and shows you the correlation. So it's really cool. He deep dives into it. And then I also really like Kira Sutherland for medical astrology. She's much more, she's studied a lot of ancient, but I'd say she's more on the modern side for it. So she talks about, even like vitamins and minerals, which is quite new for medical astrology, because just back then they didn't have that type of information. So it's kind of neat that she ties some new things together, but she derives it from ancient as well. So those are probably my top two go-tos for that.
Are you familiar with Judith Hill?
Yeah, Judith Hill is amazing. So that's who Sage Popham predominantly learned from her a lot. So Judith Hill is really, she's incredible too.
She's one of the more elder in that field, right? And then Diana, Diana, who does the video series on the new moon and full moon with me, she just enrolled on a course that's given out of Washington, D.C., I think, or Washington, not sure. I don't have much details on it, but she's just registered on a year-long course on herbalism, astrology, and so that's going to be interesting to see what she gets out of that as well.
Good for her. I love that.
Yeah, no, it's we're definitely, again, I think that astrology is a practice and it's a study, and it's really makes it that much more meaningful when we study together.
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at Mr. Peterson's chart and see what we draw out of that, and
Cool.
see. So this is a very fascinating chart. So when we look first at a chart, of course, we look at the balance between the elements. So Uranus in fire, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, the moon, the sun, Saturn, and Mercury in air sign. So the air sign is very strong with the sun and the moon and Mercury and Saturn. So we would have to say that the air element, the intellectual gift, are very strong, whereas the intuition is not as developed. And then we have Earth sign, we have Mars and Pluto, so that's intense in the Earth. And in the water, we have Chiron, Jupiter, Neptune, and Venus. So the air element and the water element are very strong. So the emotion and the rational, whereas earth and fire are much more challenged. The problem with an air and water is that they're conflicting elements. They're conflicting, so the rational thinking and the feeling function are in opposition to each other. So then we have an individual who's highly intellectual, but who also has a very strong feeling nature, which would really make it very difficult for the integration of that feeling nature. And so, that would kind of show us the conflict in that person, right off the bat in the personality. Does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, big time.
Do you take time when you analyze a chart to look at that first?
Yeah, yeah, to see like what are the elements, and especially where it's like there's more cardinal or mutable or that kind of thing.
The
One,
cardinal, fixed, and mutable are really well balanced now. So the initiator and then the fixed for sure is really strong, but also the mutable is very strong. So much more balance in the cardinal, fixed, and mutable, but the intuition and the earth element seem to be difficult, and then the conflict between the air and the water. That's interesting.
yeah.
The next thing that I do is I try to find who the final dispositor of the chart is. So who the ruler of the chart is. So we'll start with the ascendant. This is a technique. This is an ancient technique developed by, Ptolemy event, way down the line, but I've learned it from other astrologers. Um, so the ascendant is in Taurus, which is ruled by Venus. You go to Venus. Venus is in Cancer, which is ruled by the moon. And the moon is in Libra, ruled by Pisces. So right off the bat, we have a Venus moon mutual reception and a square of Venus moon. So that's going to be very important. Now the sun is in Gemini, which is ruled by Mercury. So the sun is ruled by Mercury. So that's another very strong planet. So there's that mutual reception of Venus. And this helps us in understanding when we start analyzing the chart, what are the strong planets. So far we identified that Mercury retrograde in Gemini is very strong. And then Venus moon mutual receptions are very strong. And then we have also, so then Mars in Taurus, ruled by Venus, Venus moon. Uranus in Leo, ruled by the sun, sun ruled by Mercury. Pluto's ruled by Mercury. Virgo is the ruler of Mercury is the ruler of Virgo. So then Mercury is ruling the sun, Uranus, and Pluto. Whereas the Venus moon mutual reception rules the ascendant, also Mars. And then Neptune is ruled by Mars, Mars, Venus, Venus moon, like that. So then the Venus moon also ruled the Mars Neptune opposition. And then we have Jupiter in Pisces and Saturn in Aquarius, both in their own sign. So then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 exalted planets, and all of these are ruling each other. So then these are all four very, very, all five of these are very, very strong planets. So that kind of gives us an idea of the strong planets in his chart. Did that make sense to you?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So then now we go into looking at, my technique is a bit different than a lot of the astrologers in that I mostly focus on the angular relationship between the planets as the narrative. In Jung's studies of astrology, he looks at the angular relationship between planets, calls them constellations. So here we have a Saturn, Mars, Neptune. That Saturn, Mars, Neptune is a complex a constellated complex, and it includes Jupiter, Chiron too. And we have some very complex alignments in this chart. So then we're going to analyze that, these complex of energies, these constellations. Just as an overview, we have a very powerful grand trine. We have this T-square of Mars, Saturn, Neptune, and then we have what is called a mystical rectangle. And so we'll flesh those out for you. So then we'll start with the sun. Jordan Peterson is a man. So sun is the most important. And then Mercury retrograde conjunction. So born with Mercury retrograde. So what is a sun in Gemini in conjunction with Mercury retrograde in the first house, second house? If you flesh that out, what would you get out of that?
I guess the kind of things that I saw with it was a lot of, well, I don't know, I might have gone at it a little bit differently, so I don't know. But what I saw was more, so his masculine side, it might have been harder for him to learn how to integrate. I would also think that there might be some wounding from the father, because your masculine relates to your father, just because there's like the lines to Chiron, and then just with like it connecting to the moon, the feminine.
Right.
So I also know, I know you do more, you don't do the houses quite as much, but as I understand that the second house is more like personal values. So I would think, with the sun being in there, it'd be really important for him to like express his personal values and put it out into the world, especially with it being so close to like Gemini and then Mercury.
Mm-hmm.
Is sort of what I kind of interpreted, I guess, there. And then especially Mercury being in his first, like that's first house is very personality, what you put out into the world. So same thing, just very expressive, very like a need to kind of be very outwardly expressive in the world. Is what I thought.
That's a beautiful description. My experience with someone born with Mercury retrograde is that the thinking and information gathering function is aimed inwardly in an introverted manner. Mercury in Gemini is an exalted Mercury there, but it's more concerned with what's going on in the inner world than what is going on in the outer world. It's a more introverted. So then here we have an indication that the father, the son, has more of an introverted nature, and it affects the son, in that, he kind of inherits, so this more, so you get the feeling that Jordan's father was much more reserved, socially, and that, but a sun in Gemini would be really socially active. But with the Mercury retrograde there, it'd be kind of a quiet kind of demeanor. And then that Mercury Sun conjunction makes a square to Chiron Jupiter. And that's really interesting because, one, we just lived through a Chiron Jupiter conjunction in Aries, which was fascinating to study. And we did a video on that, the Jupiter Chiron conjunction. So here, Jordan Peterson is born with that conjunction, and what we discovered in a Jupiter Chiron conjunction, and that Jupiter Chiron conjunction is almost exact. So what we have is the wise teacher, Jupiter Chiron, the wounded healer. So the healing wise teacher, so the Jupiter Chiron Mercury Sun in a T square, and then you include Saturn in there in that triangle there. So Mercury Sun Jupiter, Chiron, Saturn, both Jupiter and Chiron are exalted, and Mercury is exalted too. So then we have an introverted master communicator, spiritual healer, disciplined, Saturn in Aquarius, in the 10th house, so the Aquarian ideal, the Jupiter and Pisces, Chiron, the wise teacher, master communicator, discipline, community builder, so you're like, okay, right off the bat there, that seems really accurate with what Jordan Peterson brings to the picture, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And then there was one thing that I wondered, because it's funny, I actually missed that it was the retrograde Mercury
Yep.
until you mentioned it, and I was like, oh, I missed that. So I'm curious. It's one thing that I've heard. I don't know if you were reading about him in his like bio or anything at all. Something I heard was that it seems to be a potential pattern that people with Mercury retrograde can have, that are seem to be a bit more prone to like dyslexia. I don't know. Have you heard anywhere of him having any kind of like, it's almost like a reverse of seeing words, or I think it was like dyslexia, and there was like a couple others, but I thought that was sort of interesting. And I'm just
So
trying to see the pattern at all.
when one is with the Mercury retrograde at birth, you would have an indication that communication is difficult, and that there is, kind of a speech impediment or kind of a difficulty in communicating,
Mm,
which is really connected with the father as well, so you would have that challenge,
mm,
and so probably, he had to really face that. Now, are you familiar, if you know progressed charts, right? So if you follow progressions,
hmm.
uh, at a particular point in the progressions, Mercury will start moving direct.
Right.
So in the
Oh,
first, so Mercury has passed the sun,
hmm.
and so then it's at the fourth, it's 5 or 6 degrees away from the sun now. When it reaches through progressions, when it reaches 21 degrees, it will turn direct. So then so then the ability to communicate would have been easier to integrate
Oh,
after the 14th or 15th year into life. At that point, Mercury in the progress chart would start moving direct. So then that's kind of how we would look at it, is at the beginning of his life, it was hard to communicate. Um, and then later on, so in progress charts of the first, 14 years or so, then Mercury becomes 21 degrees separated from the sun, and then it turns direct, and then another 21 years or so, and then Mercury passes the sun, in progressions. And so then really you get a feeling that this integration of the Mercurian spirit, which obviously, there's very few people who have the mastery of communication like he does,
yeah.
and yet you can see that, it took a while for him to really integrate the Mercurian, and to work through the Mercury retrograde at birth.
Yeah.
Does
Oh,
that make sense?
that's so cool.
So far we've only looked at this. Now the next alignment with the Sun and Mercury is the grand trine with the Moon and with Saturn. So then we have Mercury, Sun, Moon, and Saturn all in air sign. And a grand trine always gives a gift, so then the mother, the father, and the son, Mercury retrograde, and Saturn, so Saturn and Aquarius about community, and
Humanitarian.
right. So the humanitarian and all of the, that comes with that, it's quite the beautiful grand trine that would show that, this gift is an ancestral gift handed down from the mother and the father, and that, most likely the mother and the father, held quite a skill, and allowed him to develop his intellect, and we're both, this feels like a household where communication towards a, Saturnian Aquarian ideal were very strong, so a strong moral and kind of an Alberta, kind of strongly moral education. And of course he was gifted from, once I think that Mercury started moving direct in his progress chart, and he really started really integrating these intellectual gifts that were, so you could get that there was some lively intellectual debates, but that probably the father was a little more introvert, and the mother was kind of the peacekeeper, that moon in Libra. And so that's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny that you said that about the mother, because that was something I picked up, or at least that I thought was like, I feel like there would have been like a very deep connection to his mother, that she would have given him a lot of just love and support and a place to be very open with his communication and expression of just himself, like while he figured himself out. And then I wonder if maybe that's where his deep ties to like his own feminine side would come from. Because if you ever notice when he speaks and communicates, he gets so passionate. Like he'll hear somebody's story, or he'll be expressing some kind of something about a specific group, and he tears up. He gets very choked up and very moved by his emotions, by what
Absolutely.
he feels. It,
Absolutely,
it,
absolutely. And that I, that Venus Moon mutual reception, and
yeah.
we're going to talk about that. But one of the planets we didn't look at right now is Mars. So when you have Mars and Mercury and Jupiter, Mars and Jupiter with the Sun and Mercury there, and then with Saturn forming that little trapezoid kind of thing here. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that's the captain of the team. Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, discipline, ability to inspire and heal, and then an incredible determination. But Mars, Jupiter, Mercury, there's a competitive spirit there that's like, wow, fiery but determined, and with that grand trine in air planets. And then you're right, pointing out the Mars, but also pointing out that that moon Venus, and then it makes this very interesting Uranian connection. And so that Venus Uranus, this is very problematic.
Oh.
So Venus is the feminine, and the moon, that connection with that mother moon Venus, is creative sign. You get a feeling that Jordan Peterson is very creative, but that his Venusian creative sign becomes overpowered by the superhero. And so
Mm.
everyone's and but it carries the Uranus. Uranus makes no other connection to the chart but through Venus. So and the health problem of his daughter, and his health problems, and his wife's health problem, you get the feeling that is really related to that moon Venus Uranus little thing. And we need to flesh that out a little more. And I was thinking, because we're coming to about the 40-minute and this was a very good discussion. So maybe we could do part two and get into it more and give you a chance to study. We'll see what we want to do with this recording.
Cool.
But the other thing too is how Pluto and Neptune form this mystical rectangle. So we have a lot more to go through. What's your feeling so far? How's this discussion been for you?
Yeah, it's been super fun. It's kind of nice. It's a good balance where I'm like, ooh, I didn't know about that part. Like I'm learning little pieces, but it feels very like yeah, he's just like such a fascinating person to dive into. I love it.
It's a fascinating chart, and he's, a fascinating human being,
Yeah.
and in a sense, one of the leading figures of an intellectual revolution that
Yeah.
is kind of a spiritual conservative, or a social conservative, or a social spiritual conservative movement that's an emerging out of the chaos of far left um thinking,
Mhm.
which really was needed to counterbalance the insanity. So, to I know that personally I owe a great deal to his work. And about 3 or 4 years ago, when we were entering the crisis, I remember kind of praying or thinking that some leader was going to emerge out of this chaos to become the voice of
Yeah.
sanity, that it was needed. And then right about that time, I discovered Jordan Peterson, and he seems to be really carrying that, but again, paying a really heavy price for it in his own feeling nature, so
Yeah.
that Venus Uranus, and because they're not connected to the rest of the chart, something like that, this is like a singleton, but it's a doubleton, I guess, if I'm creating a different word. But that here has an ability to kick in the doors and take over. You can see, that Uranian Venusian, and he starts balling out. And so, it really gives us kind of an indication of how his soul sadness, um really is the underlying motivation for all of this incredible work that he's doing.
Yeah. No, I admire. He's really just kind of stood his ground, stayed very true to his beliefs and to sticking up for people and saying things that might be really hard to say, but you can just tell that he wholeheartedly believes it. And I think I can really stand behind that because it just a very hard thing to do. I can really admire everything that he says. You can tell it just comes from his heart.
Yes, yes, yes. And but also in a masterful intellectual way, where uh where his words give us confidence and strength in knowing that there is a scientific, in a sense, it's kind of has the same effect that Jung's work has on one.
Hmm.
Jung's, for me as an astrologer, Jung really gave me the confidence to walk that path, knowing that he was himself an accomplished astrologer. So here we have an accomplished intellectual psychological guide who's developed and expanded upon, modern psychology, and drawn conclusions that are very similar to my own, and yet who is carving a path for us to move further. It's exciting, really. And so
Yep. Hmm.
So we're about to cut out. Our 40 minutes are up.